Right now downtown, it's 60 degrees. Kogo News Time, 7:12.
An investigation by American Public Media finds 34 states don't require law enforcement officers to learn de-escalation tactics to avoid shootings.
12 to 24% of all officer-involved shootings end up being a suicide by cop.
That's Rebecca Stinselli. She's a former police officer and author of the book Suicide by Cop. After this past weekend's shooting of a 15-year-old boy at Torrey Pines High School, you might be wondering what can be done to try to make these particular encounters less likely to be deadly.
Dr. Alex Del Carmen is on the Kogo News Live Line. He is the executive director of School of Criminology, Criminal Justice, and Strategic Studies at Tarleton University in Fort Worth. And Dr. Del Carmen, why aren't these de-escalation techniques taught more often?
Good morning, and thanks for having me. I think part of the problem is that many individual states have left it up to their jurisdictions to actually teach these trainings or not. And in some police departments, albeit a few, they simply have decided that it's not worth the investment. And in some other cases, to be fair, they just don't have the money to do so. But regardless, it is a tragedy when law enforcement is not trained properly.
Well, and that brings us to this. So, now we have this situation in San Diego where a 15-year-old boy was shot to death by police. They found a suicide note in his pocket. Take a look at the costs maybe associated with not just the family who's lost a child, but also the officers who realize that they've essentially shot somebody that they thought was armed, but wasn't. And that has to be horrific, the toll that takes on you.
Absolutely. Anytime a police officer draws his or her weapon, the lives of many, many people will change automatically. The life of that officer, the life of the person, obviously, that they may inflict injury upon or perhaps even death, the family members that are going to be part of that tragedy, and the witnesses that are in place. That's not even adding the financial cost that this is going to have on the agency, the cities, and the taxpayers at the end of the day.
Can we really expect police to figure it out on the fly?
It's really, really hard. I mean, you got to think about the fact that all three of us are sitting here talking about this issue right now, in an air-conditioned space, with the hindsight, which is always 20/20. But at the end of the day, law enforcement have to get it right all the time. And so this is happening in a matter of seconds. They have to determine whether or not the threat is lethal, and then use the lethal force that they have been trained to use, and hopefully use some of these de-escalation training tactics to not necessarily resort to their gun, and use other methods of engagement.
So explain what this de-escalation tactic would look like to somebody watching it from the outside.
So essentially what we train police officers to do is to resort to that weapon as their last option, meaning that if somebody comes, charging at them with a bat, that they simply think about using their baton, and if not their baton, perhaps their taser. If not their taser, perhaps pepper spray, and if not pepper spray, then perhaps their gun. But the idea is to in a matter of seconds, for that police officer to determine the level of lethality that particular force is, whether or not the individual officer is in danger, and then resort to that ultimate weapon as their last resort.
All right, Doctor, thank you very much for the information. That is Dr. Alex Del Carmen joining us on the Kogo News Live Line.